So we're talking now about the golden age of Salonikan Jewry in the 16th and 17th centuries. So the Jews lived under Ottoman rule, which was very advantageous to them. They were autonomous under what was called the millet system. Every different Christian or Jewish religious group had their own autonomy, whether they were Greek Orthodox, Jewish, or Armenian. But they had obligations, of course, and there was taxation. The Jews would pay taxes from the community to the authorities. So the authorities had expectations from the Jews, and when they needed more money, let's say because they were defeated in wars, they would increase pressure and taxation on the Jews. The Jews are, and the Christians are called a raya, which is a foreign subject, but they are called dhimmis. They're a privileged people as a minority of the people of the book. So as a dhimmi, for example, they're allowed to have religious freedom, but their synagogue cannot be higher than a mosque. They're subservient to the Muslims, but the Muslims are tolerant. The Muslims are in charge, but the Jews can, and the other groups can do a lot and be free, much more than in Christian Europe or Spain under the Catholics. So the Jews can't have a synagogue that's higher than a mosque. They can't ride horses. If a Muslim passes a Jew in the street, the Jew has to bow down. He can't look up to him. For sure, a Jew can't criticize a Muslim. A Jew cannot take a Muslim to court in the Sharia system. He can take another Jew or a Christian if, for example, he's owed debts. But the Jews had their own system amongst themselves. In the beginning, each community based on the region of origin was independent. So in other words, the Kahal Kadosh Portugal Yashan had its own rabbi, its own Beit Din, its own religious tribunal, its own printing press, its own yeshiva, its own Talmud Torah regular school or afternoon cheder school. It had its own fabric or silk industry. But that became too much because you had 30-some communities. It became too much of a burden. So the whole community amalgamated into one community, which was concentrated in the Talmud Torah. In today's terms, the Talmud Torah would be a huge shopping center. The community treasury was there. The printing press was there. The fabric industry was there. Plus the Talmud Torah, the yeshiva, the Beit Din, the libraries, etc., etc. So it's a huge building. Now, so for example, let's say they would feed 5,000, 6,000 kids for lunch. That was a whole tradition. So at holidays, the Jewish community would give children, and especially the orphans, a new set of clothes, a new set of shoes, a new set of pants, for girls' dresses, etc., etc. So in the 16th century, you had many exemplary luminaries in Salonikan Jewry. You had Rav Taitatzak, you had Yosef Karo, you had Rabbi Meir Arama, etc., etc. You'll see on the list. You had other phenomena like the Beit Midrash, the Shira V'Zimra. That was like the religious poetic academy. Or you had great yeshivot. You had exemplary Jewish poets like Sadia Longo, for example. And there were others, but so this is just part of the society. So, of course, there was no television then. So music and liturgy and non-synagogue liturgy was part of the culture. Much later in the modern period, you have popular Judeo-Spanish culture, whether it's theater. But we're before the Enlightenment, so basically all the culture is of a religious nature. There's no secular culture. And everything you did, of course, was under the supervision of the rabbis. So the Beit Din made the law. And if you stole and if you ran away from a judgment, the chief rabbi could imprison you. So, for example, in this Talmud Torah, they also had a prison. So the Jews produced armaments for the Sultan, That was something that they knew from Spain. They mined silver. They produced merino silk. They were a world economic power in the 16th and 17th century. There's a debate amongst scholars when this declined. It was because maybe England began international trade. Much later, it was because American slavery and they could produce copper cheaper. But Salonika was a major economic power as well as a cultural Sephardic center. Now, I'll give you a few examples of the problems, though, of taxation. In 1636, the Sultan ordered the execution of Chief Rabbi Kovo because he underestimated the amount and quality of the fabric transmitted to the authorities for poll tax. That was called the jizya. The Jews had to pay the jizya based on the number of people they were, the number of heads they were, and it had to be done communally. So if less Jews made less money, or more Jews made less money, the Jewish community had less money to pay for taxes. So if you're in a period of economic decline, the authorities want the Jews to pay more money, but the Jews can't pay as much. So they essentially would, in Jerusalem and all sorts of places, they would execute the chief rabbi. So the Jews financed the Sultanic Wars by payment of a special tax called the avarish. In 1646, an imperial decree of Furman ordered the Salonikan rabbinical judges, the Dayanim, to issue a special tax to finance the war against the Venetians in Crete. The Janissaries, the paramilitary corps, they rioted against the Jews and other non-Muslims after the loss of Crete in 1669. So these are some of the issues. So not everything was rosy, but it was a huge Jewish community with a lot of influence, a lot of resourcefulness, a rabbinic astuteness, and a Sephardic cultural proliferation.